Hello and welcome. Today I have the pleasure of talking to Aaron Van Wirdum, the editor-in-chief at Bitcoin Magazine and the author of the Genesis book. You just finished a panel with Peter Todd, and you guys were talking about your book, the Genesis book. Can you tell us a bit about that and how it fits into everything going on with crypto?
This was not a panel with Peter Todd. Well, I was on the live desk with Peter Todd.
Okay.
But we didn't talk about my book.
Oh.
But I can talk about my book now.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, so I wrote a book on the prehistory of Bitcoin. So it's like the origin story of Bitcoin. So before Bitcoin, there were other digital cash projects, but also economists that had alternative ideas about money. And the book kind of chronicles their stories of these people. The people that were trying these other digital cash projects, like the cypherpunks is a big part of it. But even before that, you had like David Chaum, Hayek, who wanted to denationalize money. He's a big part of the book. And the Genesis book tells the story of these people and how it all ultimately came to Bitcoin. So, you can sort of see it as the prequel to Bitcoin. It's the origin story of this entire project.
Okay, so how did it unfold? Or can you give us sort of like a Coles Notes version of?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in the book, there's kind of two storylines in the book. One of them is the economic storyline. So this is told from the perspective of Hayek in particular. And as other Bitcoin books, it kind of tells the story of the history of money and central banking. But then it takes the very Hayekian perspective on that and how he criticized that and what he thought the problems were with central banking and the solutions that he proposed. And throughout the years, throughout his long career, these were different solutions that are all very relevant to Bitcoin. So one of the solutions he thought was you need to have a money with a fixed supply, but also he thought money should be left to the free markets. That was later in his career. And then even later in his career, he said actually the best way to achieve that is to create a form of money that governments cannot stop. Like if you create something for a free market money that the government can stop, then just stop it, and then you still have nothing.
Right.
So you need to have a free market money that governments cannot stop. And earlier in his career, he predicted like the best form of money would be a money with a fixed supply. So that's sort of the Hayekian economic part of the storyline. And then the other part of the storyline is more the technical side. So the invention of public key cryptography, the invention of timestamping, timestamping databases, and then it kind of starts to merge together in the history of the cypherpunks. So the cypherpunks was this group of privacy activists, technologists, hackers, cryptographers, and they set out to they foresaw that the internet was going to be this, really big deal, and that this is in the 90s we're talking about, so the internet was very young, and they foresaw that the internet was going to be very big, but they thought this can evolve in two ways. The internet can either become sort of this global panopticon where everything you do online, every website you visit, every email you send, every message you send or receive can all be monitored and tracked and censored potentially, and they wanted to prevent that. They wanted to create a version of the internet of the future that maintains privacy for individual users. Right. So they set out to create the tools to achieve this, and that included digital cash, so a way to pay each other online while still maintaining your privacy. So these economic ideas, the ideas of reforming money, and the more technical ideas of creating something that's censorship resistant and offers privacy, these really start to grow together in sort of the cypherpunk community, and they created different digital cash systems to establish this. But they all kind of didn't work for different reasons. There was something, that didn't quite click. But then they did introduce interesting concepts and technologies. And I think Satoshi Nakamoto really brought these together in like one big package. So he picked these different things that kind of worked or that were interesting, and he made it one big working system, and that's Bitcoin. So that's sort of, that's why I describe it as, the origin story of Bitcoin itself, these different different
Right.
projects that really led to it.
That's awesome. So, talking about the government, and that the original idea was that the government didn't control this and wasn't really involved in it at all, right? But then now we just had like the first Bitcoin election in the United States, and Trump is very pro-Bitcoin. Is there an irony in that people are now loving that the government is getting involved?
Yeah, there's definitely an irony there. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It's not something that I'm personally like cheering on, but I also don't necessarily mind it. The important thing is that the government can't control Bitcoin itself, right? So we need to make sure, and by we I mean sort of everyone, the Bitcoin community, developers, users, miners, the goal is that governments cannot control it, that they can't censor it, that they can't change how it works. Like it's in a way a technology that exists above governments.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean governments themselves cannot use it or adopt it or buy Bitcoin. Like that doesn't mean that they control it. So that's the important part. I do think it's surprising to see governments, especially in this early stage, kind of jumping on top of this bandwagon. That was not one of my predictions for 2024, I guess, that it would become such a big election issue, for example. I mean, I don't think it was that big of an election issue. From our perspective, it was.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like it came up in the presidential debate, but you know, Trump did show up at the conference in Nashville, of course. So yeah, it's like on the radar now, and people, governments are talking about like strategic reserves. That's all happening earlier in the timeline than I was expecting. I wonder if it's like if Bitcoin really lives up to the potential that I think it has, then at some point I do foresee that there's going to be government pushback. Like it's very hard to imagine a future where that doesn't happen. And then the question is, what type of pushback will we get? What will that look like? But sort of this idea that from here on out, it's just governments adopting it and it's smooth sailing and we're all going to the moon. I'm not expecting that, but you know, that was, you know, revolutions don't usually happen that easily. So,
well, you see though, people talking online, like even when all the institutions were able to start buying Bitcoin through the ETFs, right? And then them saying, well, there is a potential that they can actually start manipulating this if they get enough of it, right? And then we've got like the US government that will print tons of money and they can potentially buy Bitcoin. Like, can it get to that point where and then with the halvings, right? Where they are.
I'm not too worried about that. If governments start printing money to buy Bitcoin, that will just, you know, devalue their own currencies.
Yeah.
So, you know, if they want to do that, that's up to them. So yeah, I see it more as sort of two parts. There's governments adopting it in the sense of allowing people to own it and even owning it themselves. And then so I explained in the book there's two storylines, right?
Yep.
There's the economic storyline and there's the technical storyline. So I can sort of see governments, at least in short term, jumping on the economics storyline, so to say.
Yeah.
Like they're also gonna own it and allow people to own it. The technical storyline is more about the censorship resistance and the privacy part. That part I don't see governments jumping on so easily and so fast, including now.
Right.
Like I don't really see governments talking about the right to transact privately or the right for Iranians to also be part of the network. No, that they still want that to be, you know, censored probably.
Yeah.
So you can really see these two different aspects of Bitcoin, which I think are both important. They need to work in tandem. And I see governments kind of adopting one of them, but not the other. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out over the next 5-10 years.
If you look at it in another way of like control, do you think that Bitcoin reaching 100,000 or even a little over that is because of Trump and the lead up to the election? Like, is there a part of control there as well?
At the very least, I think it's, you know, reasonable to say that the perception of Trump being positive for Bitcoin is helping drive the price. I'm not a big fan of Trump. I'm skeptical of basically everything that man does or says. So, you know, for me, it's kind of I'll see it when I'll believe it when I see it, kind of thing. Like, will he really be that positive for Bitcoin? We'll see. Maybe he will. Maybe he won't. But at the very least, right now, there's a different perception about what it, and I'm not from the US, so we don't have a two-party system. So I don't necessarily always think that easily in a two-party system. But it's not hard to imagine, but it's easy to see that the current administration was sort of definitely not very good. So then, whatever the alternative is, it's pretty easy that that's better. So yeah, I think the recent price increase definitely has something to do with at least Trump being elected.
Well, and he's brought so much awareness, right? Like there are lots of people who.
Personally, I'm a little bit skeptical of that because I think we've reached the point where most people have at least heard of Bitcoin, right?
Yes.
Even a year ago. I think that argument was very valid like 10 years ago, that most people hadn't even heard of Bitcoin. And then whatever happened that made the news was like good for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Because now at least people hear about it and they'll start researching it.
Right.
Now I think we're kind of past that point, at least, in a country like the US. I think most people have heard of it. But yeah, half the country, more or less, presumably likes Trump, and then if he likes Bitcoin, then there will be an extra incentive for them to look into it more, I would presume,
Do you see, or what do you see into 2025 in terms of what's going to happen around Bitcoin and even maybe some price predictions?
I don't really do price predictions. I'm not a strong believer in the sort of halving cycle that's driving price. I kind of think that markets are too rational or too efficient for that. But reality is challenging my perception on that because the trend is undeniable. But then again, I think you can also point at big things that happened every 4 years that would also drive up the price.
Right. Yep.
Like in 2012, 13, there was the first mainstream adoption with like WordPress and Reddit and these kind of companies adopting Bitcoin that really made it from a plaything into like an actual currency. And then in 2017, with the end of the block size wars, which was introducing a lot of uncertainty. And in 2021, with the whole COVID thing and the stimulus. And now we have Trump.
Right, yeah.
So you can also point like actual things that happened that would drive the price rather than just the halving schedule. So I'm still kind of skeptical of halving theory that's driving the price. But, at the very least, there's a cadence that's hard to deny.
So lastly, in terms of technology, do you see anything upcoming that will help?
I do think we're going to see a big push for governance. That's going to be probably the first software that's actually going to be very concretely proposed. So then, you can use Bitcoin in new ways. I think if Bitcoin becomes more useful, that can help with the price. That should help with the price, really. Utility of anything should drive the price up. I don't know by how much, though. I don't know, like, let's say CTV, check, template, verify, which is the most likely covenant protocol upgrades that we could see, for example, in the new year. I don't think that would like double the price, but it could maybe, increase the price a bit. It introduces some new utility, I would expect,
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.